I'm delighted to be here, and in keeping with the introduction, thinking 100 years ahead, what I want you to do is I want to start with a thought experiment. And I want you all to imagine that you're up here and that you're addressing a group, but this group is not an audience of business leaders, but this is your children and your grandchildren and their spouses. And you're looking ahead, and your grandpa, or great-grandpa maybe, and you're saying, here's what I learned, and here's what I want my legacy to be. And you're delivering a legacy speech to your family. And the way that you create the future that you want is to think about and define your legacy, and then kind of walk it back and say, if this is what I want to happen, what do I have to do to make that happen? What do I have to set in motion right now? What are the first steps to get there? And that's the challenge that we face with building the next generation. So I studied, as Dave said, I've just done a study and written some books about 100-year families. And what I found, many things, but one thing that came out most clearly is that I asked them, what were the important things that you did? And all of them said, well, what we did with the wealth that we created and with the business that we created is we used it to invest in many things, but the most important was to create a great family. Now, creating a great family is what I'm going to talk about, and particularly the next generation. And two things that they observed. One is that it's not as easy as you think. It doesn't work that you have an intention, I want my kids to be wonderful and great. There's a lot of hard work. And yes, we have parents in the audience. There's a lot of hard work, and part of the work that I'm going to be talking about is it's not, you think about them. I want to do this to them. I want to make them do that. I want to build responsibility in them. But the important thing to do is you have to look back at yourself and challenge some of your preconceptions, because what I want to say is that the preconceptions that we have and the assumptions we make sometimes get us into trouble. So that's the challenge. This is the book I've written about 100-year families. Thank you. So first question is about your kids. So a lot of people say, well, I want to kind of, what am I going to do with my wealth? And I want my wealth to have a good effect on my children. And they immediately go to the fact that, well, I don't want my kids to be entitled. I don't want my kids to be spoiled. And if you think about that's a very negative thing. And people ask that of me as a consultant. They say, well, how do I keep my kids from being spoiled? And I'm always puzzled by that. And I say, wait a minute, they're your kids. How old are they? And they say, oh, well, they're 25, 30, whatever it is. Well, tell me about your kids. Do you trust them? Are they responsible? And I start by asking them, what are you proud of about your kids? What do you do? How do you know them? And one of the challenges that we have is that we have raised our kids, and they were around the house for the first 15, 16, 18 years, and then they go away. And we know them as children. So I have 3 sons that are grown, that are responsible, that are working, that have their own kids. And I have to remember that when they lived in the house, they were kids. And I don't know them as adults. So there's a process in families where families have to get to know know their kids when they're adults. What is it? What are they like? What do they do? What is their experience? And you have to understand that your kids see the world differently than you. You see the world in terms of your business, in terms of what you want, but you have to reach out and say, who are they? And you have to begin to check some of your assumptions. Do you know them? How are they different? And one of the things that you have to be aware of, and this is an important thing, is that some of the decisions that you're making are based on your fear. You're anxious about how they're going to turn out. You're worried about them, and you make decisions based on fear. And we all know that decisions based on fear are sometimes not especially helpful. So the first thing that you have to do, and the thing that you have to keep in mind is, if you want to build the next generation, you have to be building the next generation in a mutual way. You're not doing things for kids, you're doing something with adults. And you have to change your mindset to understand that you have to listen to them, you have to work with them. It's not a process of doing something for them. And a lot of us, that's the way we work. So the challenge that we have is how to engage our kids in dialogue. If you want to create a situation where your kids are successful and not entitled and things, it isn't about creating a trust and creating rules and restrictions on the trust, which are based on distrust. Because if you create a trust, it means they're not able to make decisions. You want to make decisions for them. So the challenge is that how do we engage our kids in real dialogue? How do we ask them, how do you see the future? What is it? What's important to you? And we make decisions as business people. We make decisions based on the idea of being helpful and being caring. Sometimes is by making decisions for people. So we are paternalistic, and many, maybe most of us are entrepreneurs, and we're used to doing things for ourselves and making our own decisions and not really being trusting of other people, but our decisions are better than their decisions. So we make these decisions for them, and sometimes we have to understand, how is this coming across to them? So one of the things that I've seen in talking to first, second, third generation people is that the first generation people, the wealth creators, have a certain view. And that view comes not from their experience of their kids, but it comes from their own experience of the struggle that they had. And we heard from Jeet a little bit about how the struggle is. And many entrepreneurs have struggled. And so they assume somehow that their kids are going to learn in the same way. And so they say, aha, I have struggled, I've done it, and so they say, well, you're going to have to struggle, and therefore you have to make your own way. You're not going to get an inheritance, you're going to make it yourself. And this is a very strange experience. Now think of the experience of kids. So the entrepreneurs have grown up, and they've made their own way, and they've created wealth, and they've done it, and now they look at their kids, and they say to their kids, well, it's my money, it's not your money, you have to make it on your own. Now, what's their experience? So you grew up, tough circumstances maybe, your kids didn't. They've grown up in a nice house, they've grown up in a situation. How do they know that it isn't their wealth? How do they know what is their experience? And their experience is very different than the experience of the wealth creator. Their experience is they're anxious about losing it, not about how to make it. They want to please. They're in the shadow of great people and wonderful achievements, and they're saying, what can I do that makes a difference? So you have to, as a parent, begin to see that your kids have a very, very different experience, and you have to talk to them and understand, what are you concerned about? Not what am I concerned about for you, but what are you concerned about? What do you think is fair? What do you think is reasonable? And the way in which you create the next generation is by dialogue, not by creating estate plans and trusts and things like that. So one of the challenges is how do you build trust? How do you begin to come together? So the first thing that you have to understand is that you have to start when they're young. People say, oh, I want my kids not to be entitled. And I say, well, how old are your kids? Oh, they're 20, they're 30. Well, what have you been doing for the last 20 years, I want to say? And so the challenge is when they're young. Now, the teaching experiences are very, very interesting. When are the teachable moments with young people? And I'll talk a little bit about one of my sons and his experience. So he went to beautiful school very, very fancy school, and when you go to school, you go to parties. So we went to an elegant party in Silicon Valley, you know, tennis courts, swimming pool, everything, and we're driving back, and the car is your laboratory. You can have your best conversations in the car because that's when you have your kids' undivided attention. So we're driving back, and he says, "I hate our house." And I said, "Wait a minute. We live in a beautiful, you know, Victorian house in the city." And then I was thinking, well, how does he see it? So he sees all these gardens and things like that. We have a little backyard, a little deck, backyard. We have a beautiful house. And so what do we say? What do you say to that? "Shut up, kid. This is what we have." We started to say, so what do you think? How do you think, you know, so-and-so has this beautiful house? And so we had a discussion about, first of all, what he did. He created a wonderful company that we all know. Second of all, we talked about city and country, and said he lives in the country. In the country, there's a lot of land. The city, we live in the middle of San Francisco. It's like houses are together. And we talked about how people want to live together because they want to be around other people. And we talked about city houses and country houses and how they're different. Other kinds of things come up. I am terrified of cars and kids in cars. I didn't want my kids to have cars in high school. So my son, my oldest son, said, "Well, why can't I have a car?" And I thought about it, and instead of saying no, I just say you can't. I don't believe in it. We began to talk about it, and I said, "Well, gee, he goes to a private school. Now, how many of you that send your kids to private school, do your kids know how much it costs? And that private schools and public schools are different." So we had to start a conversation. Say, "Well, you go to this wonderful school. How much do you think it is?" And his thought about what tuition was about, you know, 1/5 of what the tuition was. And I said that. So that, and then said, now his friend has the old family car. I said, "Now how much, you know, it's a car?" And he said, "Well, so I say, so I'll tell you what. Would you like to go to a public school and stop going to your wonderful school, and I'll give you a car? Would that be a good trade-off?" "Oh, yeah, I see what you mean." So you have all these teachable moments with kids, and I think families that are especially privileged have to be working with their kids to learn. Now, another thing that I noticed in families, particularly wealthy, special families, is we talked about creating a place of security. And part of the security is it's a little bit scary when you have a lot and you want to create a safe environment. And so all of us live in a bubble. Wealthy people live in a bubble. We have our clubs, we have our, you know, kind of relationships, we have houses, we travel to places like this. We live in a protected bubble. And that's great for us. It may be our choice, and we may go outside it and do things outside it, but our kids do as well. So the class of the kids of my youngest son from this fancy school, we're having a lunch in Haight Street. Got it? Homeless, and we're having a lunch. We walk out, and these kids are standing on the street. They're standing on Haight Street, and these are kids, fancy, wealthy kids, and they're looking, and I became aware they've never seen a city street. They've never seen a homeless person. And so they said, "Well, how are we going to get to the museum?" Which is like about 5 blocks away in Golden Gate Park. And we're going to walk. And these kids walked along Haight Street and into the park, past homeless people, panhandlers, all kinds of things. And I was saying, this is the first experience they've had. So the challenge that you have as a parent is to help your kids move beyond that. So now let's talk about the journey. So the reason I'm talking about doing it young is because you have your kids' attention until they're somewhere in high school when they start to go off. So this is your time to teach, not later. Because what happens is, as they grow up, they individuate and they go off on their own. So your kids are going off on their own. Your kids are going away to college. And what you have to do is prepare them not to take over the business, but to go off to college. In college, they're going to meet people, different economic groups. They're going to face anxiety. Some people, like families where they're well known, the anxiety about, what do I do with my wealth? How do I say who I am? So they go off and they create their own way. And this is when you have kind of the least influence on them. They sometimes don't even come home. So you have to do your preparation before they go. And they're off, and they're learning, and they're growing. And then, it's only then that when they're, some gap of, 5, 10 years, they're out, they're doing things, hopefully constructive things, then they come back. And that's when the dialogue starts about how are we going to be together, what are we going to do, what is going to be your relationship to the business, and you have to re-meet them when they're older. And you can't do the stuff that's going to happen after they develop their own identity and their own sense of who they are too early. So there's a challenge, and the challenge as a wealth creator is what are you going to train your kids for? Now, I like to watch movies and video, and I think the movies today, I think they all take after The Godfather. They're all about gangsters, and they're all about succession and things like that. So a couple of days ago, I decided I was really tired of that, and I watched a 50s movie, Giant. You remember that? Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor, James Dean, who you may have heard of. Wonderful movie about a rancher. And the story of the rancher is this. He expects his children to go into the family business, has a son and a daughter, but he doesn't actually pay much attention to them. And his wife, in the meantime, is raising his kids. And all of a sudden, he's assuming that the kids are going to come into the business. The daughter is going to get married to a rancher, and everything is going to work out, except they're going on their own way. And so the son, of course, wants to become a doctor and looks at the poor people in the community. He wants to be a doctor in the Hispanic community. His daughter meets a wonderful guy who's a rancher, and so the son may not do it. The son-in-law will do it. Well, they want to start their own ranch. They want to have a little ranch. They want to have do their own kind of ranching and experimenting. So he's left alone because he doesn't understand that his kids are different than him. He wants to create a clone of himself. He wants to create, and that's not the way it's going to happen. So let me end by talking a little bit about the dialogue. So the way that families should deal, I believe, that deal best with succession, they have dialogues in the family. They say, what are we going to do about the future? We are incredibly privileged. We are lucky. We are blessed. And what are we going to do? And so they get together and they have a discussion, and this can happen anytime, on vacations, whatever. What is our wealth about? What is our wealth for? That's the question. What is the resources that we have? Not who's going to inherit it or who's going to go into the business, but what is it for? And in the families, what I talk about is the family deal. What is it, because you've been born in this family and the family has a lot of resources, what is it that you're entitled to? What's fair? What's reasonable? What are we going to do with it? And so the families talk about it. And for example, the older generation is concerned, well, they're going to want all the money and they're going to want to be rich. And the actual dialogue is sometimes the family members say, well, I want to be able to educate my kids. I want health care. I want a house that I can live in, particularly if I want to do a social service. I want to be a teacher, or I want to do something. I want to be, do something. Can we have a house? And so they create a way in which the family says, this is what you can expect, and then we will continue to talk about what is the bulk of our wealth going to go to. And very often, the whole family signs off on the fact that we want to do philanthropy. We want to give of service to the community. So the action step and the practical thing is you want to convene family meetings. And you want to have family meetings to talk about wealth, to talk about the future. It's not about your creating your estate plan. It's not about completing your trusts. It's really about how you're getting together as a family. And that's the challenge and the opportunity is that the family has to get together and talk about the wealth, and the family has to get together and talk about the future. And the future vision is not your vision and your expectation of what your kids will become. It's your family together talking about, we have such a blessing, we have such a wonderful thing. What do we want to see in the future? How do we want to use this wealth to make a beautiful world, a world that everybody wants to live in the future? And that's the message of raising the next generation. Thank you.